Public administration addresses societal challenges, and because they're so challenging as a field, public administration is an interdisciplinary field, and a field that draws on a wide range of professionals in academic disciplines, and very importantly, draws on men and women who are trained professionals. Men and women who are trained professionals. That's my life's work. My life's work is training people to be more effective in public administration. So to quote a roommate, so they can be men and women for all. But to do that well, it's not just good intention. You need training. And that training draws on teaching, research, and practice for a variety of tools. One, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You need many tools. And so it draws on the perspectives, the knowledge of varied academic disciplines, such as public political science, sociology, anthropology, biology, psychology, theology, philosophy. All are welcome because the problems are too big for any one discipline to solve by themselves. The challenge for teaching public administration with ethics and wisdom is to discern what the changes in societal problems, how are they different from the enduring values? The values endure. You are part of a 450-year tradition of enduring values in the Ignatian tradition. These values in the Ignatian tradition and public administration, they are enduring, but the challenges change. When I started as a public administrator, global climate change was not an issue. AIDS, HIV was a major worldwide issue. The challenges change, the values stay the same. And so the challenge is to discern what are the values and apply those values to new challenges. Public administration transforms over time to meet these challenges. The values of public administration remain constant over time, but they guide contemporary problem solving. Next slide, please. Values. So my teacher, and he was not just my teacher, he worked with former President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. He worked with Supreme Court Justice, dignity, and the value of reasonableness in the search for law. And this has guided his 60-year career. He's 94 years old now. Whether he was working in the U.S. White House, whether he was working to set up a federal personnel system in Kazakhstan, whether he was working in Central Europe after the fall of communism, he's always been driven by two values. There's a brilliant article he wrote in 2012 on that. These values start with the recognition, the normative, the value recognition that public administration is a field for the public. It's not Rich Callahan administration. It's not the administration of a president, of a premier, of a legislator, of a prime minister. It is public. It is for the public good. And so the field is not titled special interest. It's not titled factional administration. It's titled public administration for the public good. Implicit in the concept of public is the idea of the collective good. So thinking of public administration is really thinking about a profession that is guided by what is in the collective public good. This concept of responsibility for others aligns very strongly with the Jesuit theologian Walter Burkhardt in his 1996 book, where he talks about justice. And you heard Father Augustine talk about justice, a just and sustainable world. Father Burkhardt describes justice in the biblical tradition as fidelity to the demands of relationship, being faithful to those who are in relationship to. And so public administration very much aligns with this idea of a set of real relationships. These relationships, the men and women in public administration, start with the recognition of the human dignity of each participant in the relationship. And with actions guided by the rule of law. What rule of law means is we're all treated equally. Whether we're a person who has no income or whether we're the monarch. It's the concept of lex regis that McElwain developed in his book to talk about the process of constitutionalism extends equal protection to each person. And we see that because we believe strongly in the human dignity of each person. So, if you could do the next slide, please. So, it's one thing to know this, okay? So, I mentioned I come here for judo. You could watch, how many people watch YouTube? Anybody ever watch YouTube? You could watch judo on YouTube forever, and you could not do judo. You could talk about ethics forever and not do ethics. What you need, and this is why the college is so important. This is why you being here is so important. This conference is so important because it is teaching. The challenge of teaching ethics and developing wisdom are two different activities. Ethics can be conceptualized as putting into practice the values of public administration. Okay? There is a need to shift from understanding what is ethical to the actual practice of ethics. Newland's description of a search for rule of law frames ethics as an action, frames ethics as a series of actions, and it frames ethics as a search. It's not going to be perfect. That doesn't mean you don't stop. You actually continue. It's an ongoing journey with an eventual destination, but because you're not there, you keep going. The framing as a search invites a humility, invites an openness, or as our welcoming speaker said, invites a curiosity, because it's a search. The starting point for wisdom, the very starting point for ethical wisdom, is getting closest to the people, closest to the problem. Developing a capacity for listening. Effective public administrators are excellent listeners. This aligns, in the Jesuit tradition, this starts with the idea of meeting people where they're at, or as the current Jesuit, Father Greg Boyle says, developing a circle of kinship. He has a brilliant TED Talk on this. And so in a professional setting, the researcher, the journalist Robert Kaplan, he describes an American, Bob Gersony, as the United States' greatest humanitarian because Gersony did something different and better than anyone else. He met people where they're at, he took notes on, he listened. He met one-on-one for days and days and days, and he took notes in very dangerous situations. And he used that information to change American foreign policy. How did he do it? By listening. Okay. Most recently in America, a wonderful writer and practitioner, Jennifer Polka, she offers example after example of starting with the end user of public services. Figuring out with the people who use the roads, who drink the water, who go through the health system, who are going through the government systems, what do they need to have a better experience so they can trust government? How can information technology better serve people? Listening respects the human dignity. Having that knowledge that you get from listening allows you to act ethically and by ethics, and allows you to operationalize the value of human dignity. And so teaching this, really, there's no one way to teach it. There's many roads to excellence. And so teaching ethics depends on context. And so first is listening, developing an understanding of the needs of the people you meet. So yesterday I start my class asking the class, what do you think of the Nepalese government? Now I will not say here what they say, but I will tell you they very candidly discuss the good things and things where there are opportunities for improvement. You start with listening. The second piece is, for teaching, you design a specific curriculum and activities that address the identified needs. And then third is action, practice. You deliver the curriculum. Next slide, please. Teaching. Back on. Oh, one more slide. Nope, one more. Perfect. The practice of ethics and wisdom in public administration. Did you say your hand? So good. Thank you very much. Okay. The practice of ethics and wisdom in public administration really calls for research on how talent develops. Ethical practices don't develop magically. And the brilliant term for this, and with respect to Professor Hirano, one of our keynote speakers, the Japanese have a brilliant term for this. It's called ren-shu. It means something new, and then repetition, repetition, repetition. And so, for me, the key in ethics is you teach it, but you begin a process that provides people the opportunity for practice. The most effective development of talent occurs when high performers gather together, a process that researcher Daniel Coyle describes as hotbeds of talent. You need to convene people, bring them together, like you're do at least those four things. Okay? We have to be in a search. The accumulation of experiences of acting ethically, coupled with humility, create an openness to deeper understanding. And why do we want deeper understanding? So we have more effective practice. That is the idea of the university. That is the idea of the college here. We research so we understand more deeply. We listen so we understand more deeply, so that we can act more effectively. So you can see my discussion today is a challenge. It is a challenge not just to learn, but it is a challenge to act. Okay? The context of public administration, though, occurs in the world of politics. More specifically, long-standing research in public administration has thought to better understand how does the administrative and the political interact. And so recently with a colleague from Canada, Tim Mao, from the University of Gulf, though I said it wrongly, I apologize. We wrote an article that was published in one of the leading journals, and we talked about politics as a series of relationships. You know, I started this with ethics acts in relationships. So the best way to think about it, and Father Augustine talked about leadership and how important it is. And in his discussion, he talked about leadership is developing the next generation. Teaching is developing that generation. Leadership in politics is really understanding how effective political leadership is a series of relationships of shared values. You can have relationships in politics and it's not public leadership because there's not values. What I'm defining politics and understanding is the relationship that the political have, that the values that you share, the values of human dignity, the values of search for rule of law. How do you incorporate that into the relationship between the elected officials, the appointed officials, the civil officials, the career officials, the newly appointed officials? How are those relationships, do you introduce shared values? So, the last piece, in conclusion. Now, I mistitled this. This is not a conclusion. This is only a start. This is only an invitation to future dialogue. And the challenge in teaching is really to provide the scaffolding and the opportunities for practice to get successful experiences so you develop wisdom. Wisdom isn't learning what not to do. Wisdom's learning how to be effective at doing something that's driven by values. Okay? You avoid things, but you're driven towards it. So another way of framing the challenge of public administration is to explain through research and then to teach the best practices for how ethical cooperation emerges in contested political environments. We need to deepen our understanding and find cases where ethical values, the values of human dignity, the values of the rule of law, have driven successful projects in contested political environments. That's why I say this is a challenging field. My speech is a challenging field because this is not the work that's easy. This is the work that's difficult. This is the terrain that's contested. And this terrain where you have the intersection of the political and of the aspirational and of the administrative. So the other piece, and I've written about this in terms of governance and how you come together for infrastructure, an article I wrote, and any material I cite today, I'm glad to share with you. The challenge of public administration, though, and ethics, not only occurs at the individual level. It's not just within us. It's also at the organizational level and the institutional level. So this makes it even more challenging. And so to continue to advance ethics and wisdom in public administration, research is needed on the dynamics of ethics and of the ethics as wisdom in the individual level. How do people do it? How do organizations do it? How do you design institutions to incorporate and advance these values of human dignity, rule of law, and other values? Okay? The research is needed on the best practices. We need research and sharing of stories. Father Augustine talked about leadership. There's a famous leadership researcher, Warren Bennis, and he talks about leadership as storytelling and how effective these stories are. What are stories of when ethical leadership works well? Okay? Again, Father Augustine quoted Dr. Martin Luther King, a brilliant and beautiful example of ethical leadership. That's an exemplar. The earlier speakers started quoting Nelson Mandela. A very difficult time he led through. And most of his life he spent in prison. He comes out and he leads. We need to find these examples in the United States, these examples in Nepal, in Kazakhstan, in Slovakia. And share these examples throughout the world, in Madagascar, in Morocco, and wherever we come across these examples, inspire people and show people how to act ethically and with wisdom. We need case studies that can deepen our understanding of this, and we can teach from. So future research can add to the wisdom accumulated to date. So there's been much, and there have been many people who have acted with great ethics and wisdom, and we are building on what they have done. And so we identified the best practices for teaching, for applying ethics in the future. And to finish with the idea of a fundamental transformation. What is needed is a fundamental transformation that needs to occur is to really, how do we operationalize these values of human dignity, of rule of law, of accountability that Father Augustine talked about? How do we operationalize that? And I would say that the measure of developing trust in public organizations, public institutions, if they trust it, you're connected to them by the values that they care about, by what serves them. And so the work that I've done, so there's two steps that are needed. One is we need government that promotes the public trust, that officials acting ethically with wisdom. And the second step is we need to work to make government, public administration, more effective. Improve the responsiveness and effectiveness in government in delivering services for the public. I've been involved, and I'll finish with this, with an effort at the National Academy of Public Administration to teach what is called agile government. And there's two goals in agile government. Well, there's one goal. One goal is to build trust in the capacity of government to do good. That's ethical behavior. Build trust. And how do you do that? By having more effective government. And what are the steps? And I've talked about some of them. Focusing on the people that you're serving. So this concept of agile government is a concept that operationalizes the values we care about so that people can find trust that public administration, that government, that society is moving forward for the collective good. Now this is not an easy task. So it's fortunate that you have very good teachers here, you have very good leadership here, you're connected to a 450-year tradition that does not look for the easy work. It looks for the hard work in difficult places. I'm really honored to share this with you and for all of us to be with a lot of other very important and significant people. You are not alone in caring about ethics, in accumulating wisdom, and applying it for the collective good. This is a collective effort of researchers, long-standing, of my colleagues and others. And there's more. This is just a start. So I'm deeply honored to have this opportunity to really challenge yourself and to challenge myself. I appreciate Professor Dr. Manny's challenge, and to be clear about it, and to be clear in my teaching, and to be clear in what I can do to help people, you. Each of you are the most important person to me, because you'll be doing this work in ways I'll never see, but in ways that many lives will be changed for the better by your application and understanding of ethics and wisely applying it for the collective good. So my deep appreciation, and I look at this at the beginning of a conversation, and I hope it's a long conversation that you find helpful. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Richard F. Callan, for that insightful and impactful keynote address. Your words have given us a deeper understanding of how ethical knowledge and wisdom can transform public administration and how we as scholars and practitioners can contribute to this crucial endeavor through teaching and research. Thank you once again for your valuable contribution to ICSXC 2024.
We will now take a short tea break. Please feel free to stretch, refresh yourselves, and engage in informal discussions. This is a great time to exchange ideas, connect with peers, and even spark some fresh insights before we dive into the next sessions.
After this short break at sharp 11:10 a.m., the parallel sessions will begin at the respective halls. That is hall number 1, which is here itself, hall number 2 at 6th floor, and hall number 3 at room number 401. The volunteers will guide you towards your respective halls, so the chairs will be moderating the respective sessions. After the session concludes, we will break for lunch and we will reconvene here at 2:10 p.m.